NATO on alert. A senior Western intel chief warns Putin is aiming for war with NATO within a year of ending the Ukraine fight. As Moscow parades nuclear firepower through Red Square, fears of a wider conflict are rising fast. A senior Western military intelligence chief has warned that Vladimir Putin is preparing for war with NATO within a year of ending his conflict in Ukraine. MSN reported on May 9th. The World War III threat was highlighted as the Kremlin staged one of the largest military parades in modern Russian history, with tanks and nuclear missile carriers thundering across Moscow's Red Square in a show of strength. Putin used the annual Victory Day event on May 9th to mark the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Hitler and to showcase his latest high-tech weapons, including killer drones used against Ukraine. Dutch military intelligence chief Vice Admiral Peter Rethink warned starkly. Russia is producing much more artillery, also with help from other countries than they need for the war with Ukraine. Putin is not only replenishing depleted stockpiles, but moving new artillery units toward NATO borders, including the Baltic countries and Finland. That's an indication for us that they are building up capability. The Netherlands, like the rest of NATO countries, is in a phase of an enhanced readiness program to make sure that we're ready if that occurs. MSN further reported that some Russian experts fear that Putin now depends on a war economy and cannot hold his military dependency as Putin held the Victory Day parade. Donald Trump increased pressure on Russians to agree to a peace deal amid suspicions the Kremlin intends to return to full-scale war at the end of its unilateral ceasefire. On the night of May 10th, the U.S. president demanded a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, which Ukraine, but not Russia, has already agreed to. Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance attacked Putin for making unrealistic demands. We knew that Russia would ask for too much because of the Russian perception of war is that they are winning. But Russia cannot expect to be given back territory that they have not even conquered yet. And that is one of the things that they included in the original peace plan, just as the Moscow parade was underway. EU foreign ministers gathered in Ukraine on May 9th to agree to a special war crimes tribunal intended to snare Putin and almost 24 other Russian leaders. The EU further pledged €1 billion from the proceeds of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine as part of its support to Kyiv against Moscow's invasion. The funding would directly support Ukrainian defense companies, that EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said. Foreign ministers and diplomats from 35 countries, including EU, UK, and Ukraine, gathered in the western city of Lviv to sign the agreement. The leaders also endorsed the establishment of a special tribunal to prosecute the leadership of Russia, Belarus, and North Korea for the crimes of aggression against Ukraine. Meanwhile, Romanian hard-right politician George Simion, who came first with 40.96% of the vote in the presidential polls and will go into the runoff on the 18th of May as the clear favorite against the liberal mayor of Bucharest, said Russia is not a significant threat to NATO and the only risk to the eastern flank of the alliance is NATO's own dismantling, that we are not threatened by Russia, but Russia doesn't have the potential to represent a significant and important threat towards the biggest military alliance in the world. This is why the only threat is the potential dismantling of NATO's. This is what concerns us for Romania, for Poland, for the Baltic states. This is a major security threat. We must work on the unity of NATO, and we must keep NATO as a defensive alliance. There are those who would like to create two geopolitical blocs or opposing blocs, even the EU and the US. We are in favor of keeping the unity of the free world and enforcing the only way NATO will work is with the United States as its leader, and of course the European states should spend more on their defense. The Eurosceptic nationalist won the first round of presidential polls 0.5 months after the original vote was canceled because of alleged Russian interference denied by Moscow. Simion, 38, opposes military aid to neighboring Ukraine, and is critical of the European Union's leadership. He has also supported U.S. President Donald Trump's Make America Great Again movement. Chinese President Xi Jinping told Russia's Vladimir Putin on May 8th that their two countries should be friends of steel as they pledge to raise cooperation to a new level and decisively counter the influence of the United States. At talks in the Kremlin on May 8th, the two leaders cast themselves as defenders of a new world order, no longer dominated by the U.S. The two presidents signed a joint statement on further deepening the China-Russia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership of Coordination for a new era and witnessed the exchange of multiple cooperation documents between the two sides in a lengthy joint statement. They said they would deepen relations in all areas, including military ties, and strengthen coordination in order to decisively counter Washington's course of dual containment of Russia and China. The victory over fascism, achieved at the cost of enormous sacrifices, is of lasting significance. Together with our Chinese friends, we firmly stand guard over historical truth, protect the memory of the events of the war years, and counteract modern manifestations of neo-Nazism and militarism facing the countercurrent of unilateralism and bullying internationally. China will work with Russia to shoulder the special responsibilities as world powers and permanent members of the UN Security Council to take on the responsibility. The two countries said the Ukraine conflict could only be settled by removing its root causes, a phrase that Russia has frequently used when arguing that it was forced to go to war to prevent the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO's Ukraine, and its Western allies say that was a false pretext for what they called an imperial-style invasion. These participation and the joint statement aligning China with Russia's view of the conflict provide Putin with an important boost as Russia comes under pressure from the United States to end the war.